Please. The word cut through the silence like a crack in glass. Zuri Bennett let the plate slip from her hands, caught it just in time, her breath stalling as she felt him behind her. Midnight wrapped the kitchen in shadows, the kind that hid secrets instead of light. She hadn't heard Kang Ji-Hwan enter. Men like him didn't announce themselves, they were simply there. She turned slowly. He stood too close, his jacket gone, his white shirt open at the collar like he'd forgotten the rules that governed his life. The man who ruled Seoul's underworld without mercy looked nothing like the stories whispered about him. His gaze wasn't commanding, it was fractured. "You saw," he said quietly. Zuri's back met the counter. She had seen everything, hours earlier hidden in the corridor, watching his wife dismantle him with precision and cruelty. The rejection, the threat, the way power slipped from his hands without a single raised voice. "This isn't appropriate," Zuri said, even as her pulse betrayed her. "I'm not asking for forever," Ji-Hwan replied. His voice was raw now, unprotected. "Just tonight." This was wrong. He was her employer. She was here for answers, not temptation. She should have walked away. She should have remembered why she came. But as Ji-Hwan stood there, powerful, broken, and asking, Zuri understood one thing with terrifying clarity. Whatever she chose next would change everything, and there would be no undoing it. Zuri Bennett learned quickly that invisibility was a language. She spoke it fluently. In Kang Ji-Hwan's house, people didn't see maids. They saw clean floors, silent corridors, doors that opened and closed without memory. Zuri moved through the estate like a shadow stitched into the walls, her steps measured, her eyes lowered, her voice kept soft and careful. That was how she survived the first week. That was how she listened. The mansion itself was old money disguised as restraint. No gold, no excess, just polished stone, muted colors, and the constant, quiet presence of power. Men in tailored suits passed her without a glance. Women with rigid smiles spoke over her head as if she were furniture. Zuri absorbed it all, cataloging routines, mapping spaces, counting cameras. No one asked her name twice. That was the point. She rose before dawn and worked until the house slept again, learning the rhythms of Ji-Hwan's world. Breakfast trays untouched, dinner conversations that stopped when staff entered, laughter that never reached the eyes. The marriage, she noticed, existed only in public. In private, Kang Ji-Hwan and Choi Se-Rin were strangers orbiting the same cold star. Zuri saw him most often in passing, silent, composed, always in control. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. Men leaned toward him when he spoke, rooms adjusted themselves around his presence. From a distance, he was exactly what she expected, untouchable. Up close, she began to notice the cracks, the way his jaw tightened when his wife dismissed him with a look, the pauses, brief, almost invisible, when he stood alone in doorways as if deciding whether to enter a room at all, the way he never slept past 4. Zuri told herself none of it mattered. She was here for answers, for proof, for the truth about her brother who had vanished after chasing the wrong money through the wrong men. Every path had led here, to this house, to this name. Still, some nights as she wiped down counters in the quiet kitchen, she felt the weight of something unspoken pressing against her ribs. On the 8th night, she learned how dangerous invisibility could be. She was returning linens to the upper floor when voices drifted down the hall, low, sharp, unmistakably private. Zuri slowed, instinct pulling her back into the shadows. Choi Se-Rin's voice carried first, smooth and precise, each word placed with intention. Kang Ji-Hwan answered quietly, his tone controlled, but strained in a way Zuri hadn't heard before. She didn't mean to listen, but then she heard her own name, not Zuri, but the Maid, dismissive, casual, as if Zuri were already erased. Something in her stilled. She edged closer, breath shallow, just in time to see what no one was ever meant to witness: power slipping. Not in violence, not in shouting, in rejection. Se-Rin stood immaculate, unmoved. Kang Ji-Hwan stood in front of her, unguarded in a way that felt almost indecent. Whatever he asked for, she refused with a smile that cut deeper than anger ever could. Zuri stepped back before she was seen, heart hammering, the truth settling heavy in her chest. This house was not what it seemed, and neither was the man who ruled it. When Zuri returned to her small room that night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene, understanding dawning slowly and terribly. In a house full of people who looked but never saw, she had seen too much. And from that moment on, being invisible was no longer safe. The silence between Kang Ji-Hwan and Choi Se-Rin was not the kind born from peace. It was deliberate, curated, sharp. Zuri noticed it at breakfast first. The long table was set immaculately, porcelain untouched, steam rising from dishes no one rushed to eat. Kang Ji-Hwan sat at the head, posture straight, attention on his phone. Se-Rin arrived minutes later, elegant and unhurried, her presence shifting the room without word spoken. They did not greet each other, no good morning, no glance, just the quiet acknowledgement of two people who understood the rules of distance too well to break them. Zuri poured tea and stepped back, eyes lowered, but she always listened. She always listened. Conversation, when it happened, flowed around Ji-Hwan, not between them. Se-Rin spoke to advisors, to guests, to the room itself. Kang Ji-Hwan replied when required, his tone neutral, efficient. They were allies in appearance only, bound by something colder than affection: power, expectation, legacy. The staff mirrored the silence. No one lingered, no one interfered. It was as if the house itself had learned to hold its breath when they were together. Later that day, Zuri crossed paths with Se-Rin in the west corridor. The woman stopped her with a single raised finger, eyes sharp and assessing. Up close, Se-Rin was flawless in a way that felt intentional, every movement controlled, every expression calculated. "You," she said, gaze flicking over Zuri without interest. "Be careful where you walk." Zuri bowed her head. "Yes, ma'am." Se-Rin smiled then, not warm, not kind, a smile meant to remind Zuri of her place. "People get lost in this house," she added softly, "especially those who forget they are invisible." Zuri swallowed and stepped aside as Se-Rin passed, perfume lingering like a warning. That night, the silence broke. Zuri was finishing her duties when she heard raised voices from the study, a rarity. Ji-Hwan's voice remained low, controlled, but there was an edge beneath it now. Se-Rin's was calm, almost bored. "You've made your point," Ji-Hwan said. "I've made several," Se-Rin replied. "You just chose not to listen." Zuri paused at the end of the hall, pulse racing. She knew she shouldn't be there. She also knew this was the kind of moment her brother would have told her never to ignore. "You're freezing me out," Ji-Hwan said. "In front of everyone." Se-Rin laughed quietly. "Don't be dramatic. You still have your empire. For now." "For now?" he repeated. "Yes," she said, voice silk smooth. "That's how time works." There was a pause, long, heavy. "We need to present unity," Ji-Hwan said finally. "The families are watching." "They always are," Se-Rin replied. "That's why I'm careful." "Careful with what?" he asked. "With you." Zuri felt the words settle like ice. "You don't need me," Se-Rin continued. "You need the idea of me, and I'm tired of pretending that's the same thing." "What do you want?" Ji-Hwan asked. Se-Rin's voice lowered, sharpened. "Control." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Zuri stepped back just as the door opened. Ji-Hwan emerged alone, his expression unreadable, his composure intact, almost. He didn't see her at first. When he did, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Restraint. Neither of them spoke. Zuri bowed and moved past him, heart pounding. In that moment she understood the truth of their marriage. It wasn't loveless because love had died. It was loveless because love had never been allowed to exist at all. And somewhere between that silence and the cracks beneath it, everything was already beginning to fall apart. Kang Ji-Hwan never asked for anything. Zuri learned that in the smallest ways. In the way he accepted what was placed in front of him without comment, in the way he dismissed favors before they were offered, in the way his authority moved through rooms without effort, as if the world had already agreed to bend. He didn't ask for loyalty, he expected it. He didn't ask for respect, it followed him like a shadow, and he certainly didn't ask for kindness. That was what made the moments when he almost did so unsettling. Zuri noticed it one evening when she brought tea to the study. Ji-Hwan stood by the window, jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up. The city glowed beneath him, cold, distant, obedient. He didn't turn when she entered. "You can leave it there," he said. She set the tray down quietly, then hesitated. She didn't know why. Something in his stillness felt heavier than command. "Is there something else?" he asked, not unkindly. "No, sir," Zuri replied. Then, before she could stop herself, "You haven't eaten." It wasn't her place, she knew that. Ji-Hwan glanced at the untouched plate on the desk. For a moment his mask slipped, not enough for anyone else to see, but enough for Zuri to catch the fatigue beneath it. "I will later," he said. It sounded like a habit, not a plan. She nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Zuri." He had never used her name before. She froze, heart stuttering. "Yes, sir?" "Where are you from?" The question was simple. The way he asked it was not. "Chicago," she said carefully. A pause. "You don't sound like someone who plans to stay invisible." Zuri met his gaze for a half-second, long enough to be dangerous, then looked away. "I do my job." A faint curve touched his mouth, not a smile, an acknowledgement. "So do I." From that night on, he noticed her. Not openly, not in ways that drew attention, but Zuri felt it, the way his gaze lingered when others dismissed her, the way he spoke less when she was nearby, as if he were weighing words he never let himself say. Once he caught him watching her clean a shattered glass from the floor, not with interest, with something closer to regret. "You'll cut yourself," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "I won't." "You don't ask for help either," he observed. The words hung between them, too close to truth. Zuri straightened slowly. "Some of us learn early not to." Ji-Hwan nodded once, as if filing that away. "Yes," he said, "some of us do." That night, Zuri lay awake longer than she should have, replaying the exchange. She reminded herself of why she was here, of her brother, of the files she'd already found, the numbers that didn't add up, the names that circled Ji-Hwan's empire like ghosts. Still, she couldn't shake the image of him standing alone by the window, carrying a world that never asked what it cost him. Days passed, then weeks. The house remained quiet, the marriage colder, and Ji-Hwan remained a man who never asked, until the night he finally did. When he stood behind her in the kitchen, when his voice broke the silence, when he said, "Please," Zuri understood then what made him truly dangerous. It wasn't his power, it was how long he'd survived without ever needing to beg. Choi Se-Rin believed in preparation the way other people believed in fate. Nothing about her life was accidental, not the marriage, not the smiles, not the silences she deployed like weapons. Zuri saw it in the way Se-Rin entered rooms already knowing who would speak first, in the way she listened more than she talked, in the way she never reacted until she had decided what her reaction would cost. Se-Rin woke after Ji-Hwan left and slept before he returned. Their schedules overlapped only when they were meant to be seen, at charity events, family dinners, public negotiations where unity was required. There, she played the role flawlessly, hand resting lightly on his arm, smile precise, eyes warm enough to convince anyone who didn't know better. Zuri knew better. She saw how Se-Rin watched Ji-Hwan when she thought no one was paying attention, not with anger, not even resentment, with assessment, as if he were a board already laid out, pieces shifting exactly as planned. One afternoon, Zuri was summoned to the sitting room. Se-Rin sat by the window, sunlight cutting sharp lines across her face. She didn't look up when Zuri entered. "You've been here longer than the others, long enough to notice things," Se-Rin said calmly. "Long enough to notice things." Zuri kept her gaze lowered. "I do my work." "Yes," Se-Rin replied, "you do." The pause stretched, deliberate. "Tell me," Se-Rin continued, turning at last, her eyes cool and precise, "does my husband speak to you?" The question was a trap. Zuri felt it snap shut the moment it was asked. "Only when necessary," she answered carefully. Se-Rin studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "Good." She rose smoothly, circling Zuri once, close enough for Zuri to feel the weight of her presence. "Men like my husband mistake silence for emptiness," Se-Rin said softly. "They believe if something isn't demanded, it isn't wanted, that if something isn't asked for, it doesn't matter." She stopped in front of Zuri. "They are wrong." Zuri's pulse quickened. "I don't understand, ma'am." Se-Rin's smile sharpened. "You're not meant to." That evening, Zuri watched Se-Rin at dinner, how she corrected Ji-Hwan in front of guests without raising her voice, how she redirected conversations, how she casually referenced decisions he hadn't agreed to yet. Each move subtle, each one deliberate. Power, Zuri realized, didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered and waited. Late that night, Zuri returned linens to the upper floor and heard Se-Rin's voice again, this time on the phone. Zuri paused instinctively, hidden by shadow. "Yes," Se-Rin said quietly. "He suspects nothing." A pause. "No, not yet." Another pause, longer this time. "Everything is already in motion. When the time comes, he won't even understand how he lost." Zuri backed away slowly, heart hammering. The pieces began to align. Missed meetings, delayed approvals, allies growing distant. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was strategy. Later, Zuri crossed paths with Ji-Hwan in the hallway. He looked tired, the weight heavier tonight. He nodded once in acknowledgement, then stopped. "Have you seen my wife?" he asked. Zuri hesitated. "She retired early, sir." Ji-Hwan nodded, but something in his expression suggested he already knew the answer didn't matter. As he walked away, Zuri felt the shift again, the subtle realignment of power she was only beginning to understand. Choi Se-Rin wasn't reacting to Ji-Hwan's weakness, she was engineering it. And for the first time since entering the house, Zuri felt true fear. Not of the man everyone feared, but of the woman who never raised her voice and never miscalculated. Because when someone planned this carefully, they never intended to lose. The truth didn't announce itself. It waited. Zuri learned where to look by watching what the house avoided. Certain rooms were cleaned twice. Certain drawers never opened by staff. Certain conversations ended the moment she entered, then resumed, lower, sharper, once she was gone. Invisibility was still her greatest weapon. She began with schedules, cross-referencing arrivals and departures, noting which men stopped coming to the house altogether. Names disappeared from guest lists. Meetings moved locations without explanation. On paper, nothing was wrong. In reality, the pattern was unmistakable. Kang Ji-Hwan's circle was shrinking. Late one night, while returning files to the study, Zuri noticed a book left out of place on the shelf behind the desk. It was old, leather-bound, unremarkable, except for the faint indentation along its spine, the kind made by fingers pulling it free too often. She waited, listened, counted footsteps. Then she slid the book aside. Behind it was a slim panel, nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. Zuri's breath slowed as she pressed it. The wall shifted silently, revealing a narrow compartment lined with documents and a single encrypted drive. Her pulse raced, but her hands stayed steady. She didn't take everything, only what she could memorize quickly. Dates, transfers, names tied to shell companies that led not outward, but inward, toward Choi Se-Rin's family interests, toward allies Ji-Hwan had trusted for years. This wasn't betrayal. It was replacement. Zuri closed the compartment and restored the shelf exactly as she'd found it. By the time she left the study, the house felt different, less solid, as if its foundations had begun to rot. Over the next days, the pieces multiplied. A ledger hidden beneath a false drawer in the master bedroom. A phone Se-Rin forgot to lock once, just long enough for Zuri to glimpse a message thread marked only with symbols. A name repeated too often to be coincidence. Ji-Hwan was being hollowed out, slowly, deliberately. His power siphoned away without a single open challenge. And worse, his downfall was timed. The house itself seemed to know. Conversations grew strained. Guards rotated more frequently. Ji-Hwan worked longer hours, slept less. He noticed the changes but couldn't yet see their shape. One evening, Zuri found him in the study again, standing where the city lights cut his reflection into pieces against the glass. "You're quiet tonight," he said without turning. "I usually am," she replied. "Yes," he said, "but tonight it feels different." Zuri hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to finish collecting proof, to leave when the time was right. But the truth pressed against her chest, heavy and urgent. "There are things happening in this house," she said carefully, "things you may not see yet." Ji-Hwan turned then, eyes sharp. "Are you warning me?" "I'm telling you," Zuri said, choosing each word, "that silence is being used against you." He studied her for a long moment, not with suspicion, with something closer to trust. "People always mistake silence for loyalty," he said. Zuri thought of Se-Rin's smile, of the careful patience behind it. "Yes," she said quietly, "they do." That night, alone in her room, Zuri reviewed everything she'd found. The truth was no longer just about her brother. It was about a man being dismantled piece by piece while standing in the center of his own empire. And about her. Because once you saw the truth hidden in a house like this, you had only two choices. You could disappear, or you could decide who deserved to survive what was coming. The night power shifted did not announce itself with gunfire or sirens. It arrived dressed in silk and crystal. The estate glowed with guests, family elders, business partners, men who measured worth in silence, and women who smiled like strategy. Music drifted through open doors, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell on cue. To anyone watching, it was another flawless gathering hosted by Kang Ji-Hwan. Zuri moved through the room with practiced ease, tray balanced, eyes lowered, but she felt it, the tightness beneath the celebration, the way conversations hesitated when Ji-Hwan passed, the way certain men avoided his gaze altogether. He felt it too. She saw it in his posture, in the extra care he took choosing words, in the way he scanned the room not for threats, but for absences. Power didn't vanish overnight, it thinned first. Choi Se-Rin arrived late, always. She wore black, elegant and severe, her smile a quiet challenge. When she reached Ji-Hwan's side, she did not touch him. She didn't need to. The space between them spoke loudly enough. "Beautiful evening," she said lightly. "It is," Ji-Hwan replied. They stood together, united only by appearances. Zuri watched from across the room, her pulse ticking faster as Se-Rin leaned in to greet an elder, one Zuri knew from the documents had recently shifted his loyalty. That was when it happened. A toast was called. One of Ji-Hwan's longtime allies raised his glass and spoke warmly of legacy, of continuity, of the future. As he spoke, his eyes slid past Ji-Hwan and settled on Se-Rin. To stability, the man finished, and to those who ensure it. The room applauded. Ji-Hwan didn't. The silence he left behind was small but devastating. Se-Rin turned to him, her expression serene. "You should say something," she murmured. Ji-Hwan met her gaze. For the first time that night, he didn't look composed. He looked cornered. Zuri felt it then, the exact second the balance tipped. Ji-Hwan stepped forward. "My wife," he said, voice steady enough to carry, "has always understood the value of patience." The room leaned in. "There are times," he continued, "when power is mistaken for permanence, when silence is mistaken for consent." A ripple of unease spread. Se-Rin's smile tightened. Ji-Hwan turned to her fully. "I ask," he said, and the word landed hard, "that we speak privately." A request from a man who never asked. The room froze. Zuri felt her breath catch. So did everyone else. Se-Rin hesitated just a fraction too long. That was enough. The elder cleared his throat. Another guest looked away. The shift was subtle, but it was there. Attention turning, calculations adjusting. Se-Rin inclined her head at last. "Of course." They moved toward the hallway together, and as they passed Zuri, Ji-Hwan's eyes found hers, just for a moment. In them was something raw, determined, a question he did not ask out loud. Zuri understood. Later, in the quiet after guests departed, Zuri stood alone in the kitchen, hands barest against the counter. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn. Behind her, Ji-Hwan stopped. "That was a risk," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "You lost ground. I gained time." She faced him then. In his expression was no triumph, only resolve. "That's how power really moves," he said quietly. "Not by force, by moments." Zuri felt the weight of that truth settle between them. Tonight, the balance had shifted, and nothing would ever sit quite the same again. The room was still buzzing from the night before when it happened. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the conference hall, pale and unforgiving. Elders sat in a half-circle, their expressions carefully neutral, hands folded as if patience were a virtue rather than a tactic. This was not a social gathering. This was judgment disguised as discussion. Zuri stood against the far wall with the other staff, invisible again, her pulse steady but alert. She had learned to read rooms like this. The air was tight with expectation. Something was about to be taken. Ji-Hwan entered last. The conversations died instantly. He wore a dark suit, perfectly cut, his posture straight, his expression composed. If anyone here expected weakness after last night, they would not find it on his face. He took his seat without ceremony, eyes lifting to meet each elder in turn. Choi Se-Rin arrived moments later and did not sit beside him. She chose the chair across the room instead. The message was unmistakable. An elder cleared his throat. "There have been concerns," he began. "Questions about continuity, about unity." Se-Rin's voice cut in smoothly. "Reasonable questions." Ji-Hwan turned to her slowly. "Are they?" She smiled. "I think you know they are." The elder nodded. "The families need assurance." "Assurance of what?" Ji-Hwan asked. "That this house is not divided," another voice answered. The silence stretched. Zuri felt it before she saw it, the decision settling into Ji-Hwan's bones. His shoulders relaxed. Not in surrender, in acceptance. He stood. The movement alone drew every eye. "I understand your concerns," Ji-Hwan said calmly, "and I accept responsibility for the doubt." Se-Rin's smile flickered. Ji-Hwan took a step forward, then another. Zuri's breath caught as he stopped in the center of the room. "I have never asked for trust," he continued. "My record spoke for itself." He turned then, fully, deliberately toward Se-Rin. "But today," he said, voice steady, "I will ask." A murmur rippled through the room. Zuri felt the shift like a physical blow. Ji-Hwan lowered himself. Not quickly, not dramatically. He knelt. The sound of it echoed, fabric against floor, power meeting stone. Gasps followed, shock, disbelief. Zuri's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I ask," Ji-Hwan said, head bowed just enough to be unmistakable, "for unity, for patience, for one chance to correct what has been broken." Se-Rin stared at him, frozen. No calculation had prepared her for this. "Stand up," she said sharply. Ji-Hwan did not move. The elders exchanged looks. This was not humiliation. This was strategy sharpened into sacrifice. "I am asking," he repeated, louder now, "for the sake of this house." Time stretched thin. Then Se-Rin laughed, a brittle sound. "This is unnecessary." An elder spoke before Ji-Hwan could rise. "It is persuasive." Another nodded. "A man willing to humble himself for stability deserves consideration." Se-Rin's control cracked just for a moment. Enough. Ji-Hwan stood slowly, the room watching him as if seeing him for the first time. The meeting ended soon after. No verdict, no condemnation, just delay. Time. As the room emptied, Zuri remained where she was, heart pounding. Ji-Hwan passed her on his way out. He didn't look at her. He didn't have to. She understood what he had done. He had bent so the house wouldn't break, and in doing so, he had handed her something far more dangerous than trust. He had handed her leverage. Zuri knew then, whatever came next, there was no turning back. Power had been redefined in front of everyone, and nothing terrified those who watched more than that. Zuri chose the moment carefully. Power had a way of creating noise after it shifted. Whispers, recalculations, people moving too quickly to secure their place before the ground settled again. The house buzzed with it. Ji-Hwan's kneeling had bought time, but time was dangerous if wasted. She waited until night, until the estate exhaled into quiet and the guards settled into patterns she already knew by heart. She didn't go to the study this time. She went to the private sitting room Ji-Hwan used only when he couldn't sleep. He was there, standing by the window again, the city fractured in the glass. He didn't turn when she entered. "I know," he said calmly. Zuri stopped a few steps inside the room. "How?" "You've been preparing for this conversation since the day you arrived," he replied. "Men who survive as long as I have learn to recognize intent." She took a breath. Once she started, there was no retreat. "My name isn't Zuri," she said. That made him turn, not sharply, not in anger, just enough to show attention sharpening into focus. "My real name is Zuri Bennett," she continued. "I didn't come here by chance. I didn't come for work. I came for answers." Ji-Hwan studied her face, searching now, not for deception, but for truth. "My brother disappeared 3 years ago," she said. "Following money tied to your organization, every trail ended here." Silence filled the room, thick but controlled. "You think I had him killed," Ji-Hwan said. "I thought you did," Zuri replied, "until I started finding what was hidden in this house." She told him everything then, the compartment behind the bookshelf, the ledgers, the names that didn't belong to him, the slow erosion of his power engineered with precision. When she finished, the room felt altered, like a door had opened somewhere deep inside it. Ji-Hwan turned back to the window. "You should have left," he said quietly. "Yes," Zuri agreed, "I should have." "Why didn't you?" She didn't answer immediately. Some truths demanded patience. "Because if I left, you would be destroyed, and the man who actually took my brother would walk away untouched." Ji-Hwan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something fundamental had shifted. You understand what you've done. Revealing yourself makes you a target. I've been a target since the day my brother disappeared, Zuri replied. At least now I choose why. He faced her fully. There was no anger in his expression, no betrayal, only respect edged with something heavier. Your brother, Ji-Hwan said slowly, was investigating Se-Rin's family interests. He wasn't silenced by my order. Zuri's chest tightened. Then you know who did it. Yes, he said, and now so do you. The truth landed between them, not explosive, but devastating in its clarity. Ji-Hwan stepped closer, stopping just short of where proximity turned dangerous. You were invisible by design, and now you've made yourself impossible to ignore. Zuri met his gaze steadily. I'm not asking you to trust me. A pause. I'm asking you to finish what I started. Ji-Hwan considered her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. Then we stop pretending and we become honest about what we are to each other. Zuri felt the weight of it settle, fear, resolution, and something like relief. She had spoken her real name, and in doing so, she had stepped out of the shadows forever. The end did not arrive as an explosion. It came as a series of quiet decisions, each one heavier than the last. Zuri stood beside Ji-Hwan as the final pieces fell into place. Evidence moved where it needed to go. Names were spoken aloud in rooms that no longer pretended not to hear. Alliances shifted, not with loyalty, but with inevitability. Choi Se-Rin's patience, so carefully cultivated, collapsed under the weight of her own precision. When confronted, she did not deny anything. She simply smiled, as if disappointed the game had ended before she'd finished enjoying it. The house exhaled. The marriage dissolved without ceremony. No public spectacle, no apology, just the quiet recognition that it had never been a union, only a contract that outlived its usefulness. Zuri watched Ji-Hwan sign the last document, his hand steady. When he finished, he set the pen down and leaned back, eyes closing briefly, not in relief, in acceptance. "You're free," she said softly. He opened his eyes. Freedom is relative. She understood that now. Power always came with weight. The difference was who chose to carry it. They stood together at the window as night settled over the city. For the first time since she arrived, Zuri felt the tension in her chest loosen, not disappear, but ease. The truth had been spoken, her brother's name cleared, the man responsible exposed. Justice, imperfect but real. "You could leave," Zuri said quietly. "No one would stop you." Zuri considered it. The thought of stepping into a life without secrets tugged at her, tempting and terrifying all at once. "And you?" she asked. "I will remain," he replied. "This city does not forgive absence." She nodded. That was his choice, just as hers would be her own. "I didn't come here for this, for you." "I know," he said. A pause settled between them, familiar now, no longer sharp. "I'm not asking for forever," he added, turning to face her fully. She smiled faintly. "I know." They didn't touch, they didn't need to. What passed between them was quieter, stronger, an understanding forged not by promises, but by survival. Zuri thought of who she had been when she arrived, silent, careful, invisible. She thought of who she was now. "What happens next?" she asked. Ji-Hwan studied her, then answered honestly. "We choose what matters." The city lights flickered below them, restless and alive. Zuri breathed in, steady and sure. "Then I choose to stay," she said. "For now." "For now," he echoed. It wasn't forever. It wasn't a vow or a fantasy. It was something far more dangerous and far more real. It was everything that mattered.